The gunshot that shattered the morning silence in Tombstone, Arizona, wasn't meant for Sarah Bennett. But the bullet that whizzed past her bonnet and splintered the wooden post beside her head made it clear that staying in this God-forsaken town was no longer an option. It was September 1882, and the dust had barely settled from the Earp brothers' reign when Sarah found herself running through the crowded streets. Her skirts gathered in trembling fists, her heart hammering against her ribs like a wild horse trying to break free from a corral. She didn't know who was shooting or why, but she knew enough about men and their violence to understand that questions could wait until she was somewhere safe. She ducked into the livery stable, pressing herself against the rough wooden wall, trying to catch her breath. The smell of hay and horses filled her nostrils as she listened for footsteps, for angry voices, for anything that might tell her whether the danger had passed. Her auburn hair had come loose from its pins, tumbling around her shoulders in a way that would have scandalized the church ladies back in Philadelphia, but Philadelphia was 3 years and a lifetime of disappointment behind her now. "Ma'am, you all right?" The voice was deep and calm, lacking the edge of threat she had learned to recognize in men's voices. Sarah's green eyes snapped toward the source and found a man standing in the shadows near one of the stalls. He was tall, with broad shoulders that filled out his worn shirt, and a face that looked like it had seen its share of Arizona sun. His hat was pushed back on his head, revealing dark hair and eyes that watched her with concern rather than the predatory interest she had come to expect. "I'm fine," she said automatically, though her voice shook and her hands were still trembling. She tried to smooth down her skirts to regain some measure of composure, but the adrenaline was still coursing through her veins. "That bullet came mighty close to not being fine," he said, moving slowly toward her as if approaching a spooked mare. "Name's Cole Remington. I work here at the stable and I saw what happened through the window. Those men weren't shooting at you specifically. They were drunk cowboys from the Hanson Ranch, firing at each other over a card game dispute. Still, close calls like that can shake a person." Sarah studied him warily, her body still pressed against the wall despite his calm demeanor. She had learned the hard way that a gentle voice didn't always mean gentle intentions. "Thank you for the information, Mr. Remington. I should be going." "Where to?" he asked, not moving to block her path but genuinely curious. "If you head back out there right now, you might walk into more trouble. Those boys are still riled up. Sheriff's been called, but until he gets there and settles things down, might be safer to wait here a spell." She wanted to argue, wanted to march past him and prove that she didn't need help from any man, but her legs felt like water and her breath was still coming too fast. Against her better judgment, she nodded, "Just until the sheriff arrives." Cole gestured to a bench near the back of the stable, away from the street entrance. "Can I get you some water? You look pale." "I'm fine," she repeated, but she sat down anyway because her knees were threatening to give out. She watched him move to a barrel in the corner and dip a ladle into it, pouring water into a tin cup. When he brought it to her, she took it carefully, making sure their fingers didn't touch, he noticed. She could tell by the slight pause in his movement, the way his eyes registered the deliberate distance she maintained. But he didn't comment on it, didn't push or crowd her space. He simply stepped back and leaned against a post, giving her room to breathe. "You're not from around here," he said after a moment. It wasn't a question. "Philadelphia," she admitted, taking a small sip of the water. It was cool and clean and it helped settle her stomach. "I came west 3 years ago, long way from home." He pulled a piece of straw from a nearby bale and turned it between his fingers, an idle gesture that somehow made him seem less threatening. "What brought you to Arizona?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with all the things Sarah didn't want to say. She could give him the simple answer, the one she gave everyone who asked, but something about the way he waited, patient and unhurried, made her want to tell the truth, or at least part of it. "A man," she said finally, her voice bitter. "I was engaged to a merchant back in Philadelphia. Thomas Carver. He had a successful business, a good reputation, all the things a woman is supposed to want in a husband. 2 weeks before our wedding, I discovered he had another woman, a mistress he kept in a house on the outskirts of town. When I confronted him, he told me it didn't matter, that all men did such things, and I should be grateful he was willing to marry me at all. Cole's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. I broke off the engagement, Sarah continued, staring down at the cup in her hands. My family was furious. They said I was throwing away my future over foolish pride. My father told me that if I couldn't be sensible, I could make my own way in the world, so I did. I used the money my grandmother had left me and came west, thinking I could start fresh, maybe open a dress shop or teach school. But Cole prompted gently. But I met another man in Santa Fe, James Wheeler. He was a rancher, or so he claimed, charming, attentive, everything Thomas wasn't. He courted me properly, spoke of building a life together. I was careful this time, or so I thought. I didn't give him money, didn't agree to marry him right away. But I trusted him enough to travel with him to his ranch, with a chaperone of course, to see if it was really the place he described. Her hands tightened around the cup. There was no ranch. He was a con man who targeted women traveling alone. If it hadn't been for my chaperone's brother showing up unexpectedly, I don't know what would have happened. He left us stranded in a way station with no money and no horses. It took me 6 months of working as a laundress to save enough to continue on. And you ended up in Tombstone, Cole said quietly. I ended up in Tombstone, she confirmed, where I've been working as a seamstress for the past year, keeping to myself, trusting no one. She finally looked up at him, meeting his eyes directly. So you see, Mr. Remington, when I say I've been hurt before by trusting men, I'm not speaking in abstractions. I've learned my lessons well. Cole was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. Then he pushed off from the post and walked over to a nearby stall where a beautiful chestnut mare was eating hay. He stroked the horse's neck gently, and the mare nickered softly in response. This is Copper, he said. I've had her for 5 years now. When I first got her, she was mean as a rattlesnake. Previous owner beat her, starved her, treated her like she was nothing more than a piece of equipment. Took me 3 months before she'd let me touch her without trying to bite or kick. Another 6 months before she'd trust me enough to ride. Sarah frowned, not understanding what this had to do with anything. Cole turned to look at her. I never asked her to just forget what happened to her, never expected her to trust me just because I said pretty words or made promises. I knew the only way she'd believe I was different was if I showed her, day after day, with my actions, so that's what I did. I fed her every day at the same time, cleaned her stall, spoke gentle, never raised my hand to her even when she acted up. And slowly, she started to understand that not all humans were like the one who hurt her. Sarah felt something twist in her chest, a complicated knot of hope and fear. I'm not a horse, Mr. Remington. No, ma'am, you're not, he agreed with a slight smile. You're a woman who's been dealt a bad hand by men who should have known better. And I'm not going to stand here and tell you to trust me, or promise you that I'm different, or try to convince you with words that you've probably heard before. But I will say this. If you're willing, I'd like to show you through my actions what kind of man I am. No expectations, no pressure. Just the chance to prove that not all men are like the ones who hurt you. Sarah felt her throat tighten. It was the most honest thing any man had ever said to her, and that very honesty made her want to run. Because if she let herself hope again, if she let herself believe, and he turned out to be like the others, she didn't think she could survive it. Then watch my actions, Cole said simply, as if reading her thoughts. That's all I'm asking. Before Sarah could respond, the sound of the sheriff's voice rang out from the street, announcing that the troublemakers had been rounded up and it was safe to go about business. Cole glanced toward the entrance, then back at her. I'll walk you back to wherever you're staying, he offered. Make sure there's no more trouble. She should have said no. Every instinct she had developed over the past 3 years told her to refuse, to keep her distance, to protect herself. But there was something in his eyes, a steadiness that called to a part of her she thought she had buried. "I have a room above Mrs. Patterson's boarding house on 4th Street, she heard herself say. "But I need to stop by the dress shop on the way. I'm supposed to be working." "Then I'll walk you to the dress shop," Cole said. He didn't offer his arm, didn't move to take her elbow or guide her in any way. He simply waited for her to stand, to make her own decision about whether to accept his company. Sarah stood, smoothed her skirts one more time and started toward the stable entrance. Cole fell into step beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. As they stepped out into the bright Arizona sunshine, Sarah was acutely aware of his presence, of the way he positioned himself between her and the street where the drunk cowboys had been arrested, of how his eyes scanned their surroundings with a quiet vigilance. They walked in silence for half a block before Sarah spoke. "How long have you been in Tombstone?" "About 2 years," Cole replied. "Came here from Texas after my father died. He had a small ranch, but it went to my older brother as inheritance. I didn't mind. Ranching was his dream, not mine. I've always been better with horses than cattle anyway." "And you chose to work at a livery stable?" Sarah asked, curious despite herself. "For now," Cole said. "I'm saving money to buy my own place eventually. Nothing big, just enough land to breed and train horses. There's good money in it if you know what you're doing, and I've got a knack for it." He paused. "What about you? Do you like being a seamstress?" "I like being independent," Sarah answered carefully. "The work itself is fine. Mrs. Hendricks, who owns the shop, is fair, and the pay is decent enough to cover my room and board with a little left over." They reached the dress shop, a neat establishment with a painted sign that read "Hendricks Fine Sewing." Cole stopped at the door but made no move to follow her inside. "Miss Bennett," he said, and she realized she had never actually told him her name. He must have heard it somewhere in town. "If you'd be amenable, I'd like to call on you. Nothing fancy. Maybe a walk or a meal at the hotel restaurant, whatever you'd be comfortable with." Sarah's first instinct was to refuse, but she looked at him, really looked at him, and saw only patience and genuine interest. No pressure, no assumption that she owed him anything for walking her to work. "I don't know," she said honestly. "That's all right," Cole replied. "The offer stands whenever you're ready, or if you're never ready, that's all right too." He tipped his hat to her. "Have a good day, Miss Bennett." He turned and walked back down the street, leaving Sarah standing in front of the shop with her thoughts in turmoil. She watched him go, noting the easy confidence in his stride, the way he touched his hat to an elderly woman passing by, the way he stopped to help a boy whose apple cart had tipped over. Small actions, but they registered nonetheless. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange sort of awareness. Sarah went about her daily routine, working at the dress shop from morning until evening, taking her meals at the boarding house, attending church on Sunday. But everywhere she went, she seemed to see Cole Remington. Not following her, nothing so intrusive as that. He was simply there, part of the fabric of the town, and she found herself noticing things about him. She noticed that he was always at the livery stable early, often before dawn, feeding and caring for the horses. She noticed that he was patient with children who came to pet the animals, taking time to teach them how to approach safely. She noticed that he helped Mrs. Patterson carry her heavy grocery boxes without being asked, and that he played checkers with old Mr. Donovan, who sat outside the general store every afternoon. He never approached her directly during those 2 weeks. When their paths crossed on the street, he would nod politely and say a brief hello, but he never stopped her, never tried to engage her in conversation, never pressed for an answer to his offer. He was simply living his life in a way that spoke volumes about his character. Sarah told herself she wasn't watching him, that she wasn't interested, that she was simply being observant, cautious, the way any sensible woman should be, but she knew she was lying to herself. It was a Saturday afternoon when everything changed. Sarah had finished her work early and decided to treat herself to a cup of tea at the hotel restaurant. It was a small luxury she allowed herself once a month, a reminder that she was more than just a survivor, that she could still enjoy the finer things in life. She was sitting by the window, watching the street traffic and sipping her tea when she heard raised voices from the hotel lobby. A man was arguing with the clerk, his words slurred with alcohol, his gestures aggressive. Sarah's stomach clenched with familiar anxiety as she recognized the type, the dangerous unpredictability of a drunk man looking for a fight. The man was demanding a room, but the clerk was refusing him, citing the hotel's policy against renting to intoxicated guests. The drunk man was getting angrier, and Sarah could see other patrons beginning to look nervous, wondering if they should leave or if that would draw unwanted attention. Then Cole walked through the hotel doors. He must have been making a delivery because he had a saddle slung over one shoulder. He took in the situation immediately, his eyes moving from the drunk man to the frightened clerk to the nervous patrons. Without hesitation, he set down the saddle and approached the drunk man calmly. "Hey there, friend," Cole said in that same easy tone Sarah had heard in the livery stable. "Looks like you've had a rough day. Why don't you come on over to the stable with me? I've got a quiet spot where you can sleep it off and it won't cost you anything." The drunk man wheeled on him, eyes unfocused and fists clenched. "Who the hell are you?" "Just someone offering help," Cole replied. He didn't move closer, didn't crowd the man's space. "Hotel's expensive anyway, my offer's better." For a moment, Sarah thought it might turn violent. The drunk man swayed, his face flushed with anger and alcohol. But Cole just stood there, relaxed and unthreatening, offering an alternative without judgment or condescension. Finally, the man's shoulders slumped. "I just need somewhere to sleep." "I know," Cole said. "Come on, I'll show you where." He gently guided the man toward the door, supporting him when he stumbled but maintaining his dignity. As they passed Sarah's table, Cole's eyes met hers briefly. There was no expectation in that glance, no look that said, "See what a good man I am." He was simply doing what needed to be done. Sarah sat there for a long time after they left, her tea growing cold in front of her. She thought about what she had witnessed, how Cole had diffused a potentially dangerous situation without violence, without humiliation. She thought about all the other things she had noticed over the past 2 weeks. The pattern of behavior that spoke to who he was when no one was watching, when there was nothing to gain. She thought about his words in the stable, "Then watch my actions." That evening, Sarah made a decision. It terrified her, made her feel vulnerable in a way she had sworn never to feel again. But she also knew that she couldn't live the rest of her life behind walls of fear and mistrust. Not if she wanted to truly live, rather than just survive. The next morning after church, she walked to the livery stable. Her heart was pounding and her hands were damp with nervousness, but she kept walking. Cole was there, brushing down a gray gelding, humming softly to himself. He looked up when he heard her footsteps and surprise flickered across his face. "Miss Bennett," he said, setting down the brush. "This is unexpected." "You asked if you could call on me," Sarah said, the words coming out more rushed than she intended. "If the offer still stands, I'd be willing to take a walk with you, just a walk." A slow smile spread across Cole's face, transforming it from handsome to genuinely beautiful. "The offer still stands. When would suit you?" "This afternoon. After I've had lunch, I'll meet you in front of Mrs. Patterson's at 2 o'clock, Cole said. "Thank you, Miss Bennett, for giving me a chance." Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and hurried away before she could change her mind. She spent the intervening hours in an agony of second-guessing, changing her dress 3 times and redoing her hair twice. Mrs. Patterson noticed her nervousness and smiled knowingly, but said nothing, which Sarah appreciated. At exactly 2 o'clock, Cole knocked on the front door of the boarding house. He had changed into a clean shirt and had clearly made an effort with his appearance, though he still looked like a working man rather than a dandy. Sarah appreciated that. She had learned to distrust men who were too polished, too practiced in the art of courtship. They walked through town and out toward the desert hills, following a well-worn path that offered shade from scattered mesquite trees. For a while, neither of them spoke, and Sarah appreciated that Cole didn't feel the need to fill every silence with chatter. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah finally said. "Anything. That man yesterday at the hotel, did he really sleep at the stable?" Cole nodded. "In the tack room. I gave him some blankets and checked on him a few times during the night. He woke up this morning with a powerful headache and a lot of embarrassment, helped me muck out stalls for a few hours to work it off, then went on his way." "You didn't have to do that," Sarah said. "No," Cole agreed. "But he needed help, and I was in a position to offer it. Doesn't make me special, just makes me someone who tries to do the right thing when I can." They walked further, and Sarah found herself relaxing despite her nervousness. Cole pointed out a hawk circling overhead, told her stories about some of the horses he had trained, asked her questions about her work that showed genuine interest rather than polite obligation. "What was the hardest dress you ever made?" he asked at one point. Sarah thought about it. "Mrs. Clayton's wedding dress last spring. She wanted French lace and seed pearls and about 1,000 tiny buttons up the back. Took me 3 months of work, and my fingers were so sore I could barely hold a needle by the end. But when she put it on and saw herself in the mirror, she cried with happiness." "That made it worth it. You take pride in your work," Cole observed. "I like that." They talked about other things. Cole told her about growing up in Texas, about learning to ride before he could walk, about the brother he rarely saw anymore but still loved. Sarah found herself sharing stories about Philadelphia, about her grandmother who had been a suffragette and had taught Sarah to value her independence, about the books she loved to read when she had time. The afternoon passed quickly, and when Cole walked her back to the boarding house, Sarah realized she had enjoyed herself. More than that, she had felt safe, seen, respected in a way that had nothing to do with her appearance or what she could offer a man. "Could we do this again?" Cole asked when they reached her door. Sarah hesitated, but this time the hesitation was less about fear and more about considering what she truly wanted. "Yes," she said, "I'd like that." Over the following weeks, Sarah and Cole fell into a pattern of Sunday afternoon walks. Sometimes they walked in companionable silence, sometimes they talked for hours. Cole never tried to hold her hand, never made any advance beyond friendly conversation. He kept his word about letting his actions speak for him. Sarah learned that he sent money to his mother back in Texas every month, that he had taught himself to read as a teenager because his family couldn't afford schooling, that he dreamed of breeding horses that would be known throughout the territory for their quality and temperament. She learned that he had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh, that he was kind to animals and children with equal patience, that he kept his promises no matter how small. And slowly, carefully, she began to trust him. It wasn't a sudden thing. There was no single moment where everything changed. It was an accumulation of small actions that built upon each other like stones in a foundation. It was the way he always showed up when he said he would, never once leaving her waiting or wondering. It was how he listened when she talked about her dreams of maybe opening her own dress shop someday, and didn't dismiss her ambitions as foolish. It was the way he respected her boundaries without making her feel like she was being difficult or unreasonable. One Sunday in late October, nearly 2 months after their first walk, they were sitting on a flat rock overlooking a valley painted in autumn colors. The air was cooling as evening approached, and Sarah had wrapped her shawl more tightly around her shoulders. "You're different than you were when we first met," Cole said quietly. "You seem lighter somehow." Sarah considered this. "I feel lighter, like I've been carrying something heavy and didn't realize I could set it down." She looked at him. "You did that, through your patience, your consistency. You showed me that I could trust again without being foolish." Cole reached out slowly, giving her time to move away if she wanted, and took her hand in his. It was the first time he had initiated physical contact beyond helping her over rough terrain. His hand was warm and calloused from work, and Sarah's heart beat faster at the contact, but not with fear, with something else entirely. "Sarah," he said, using her first name for the first time. "I need to tell you something, and I want to be completely honest with you because you deserve nothing less." Her stomach clenched with sudden anxiety. Here it was, the revelation that would prove he was like all the others. The other woman, the secret debt, the ugly truth that would shatter everything they had been building. "I'm in love with you," Cole said simply. "I have been for weeks now, and I know that might scare you, and I know you might not feel the same way, and that's all right. But I couldn't keep pretending that I just wanted friendship when what I really want is to spend my life with you, to build something real and lasting, to be the man you can depend on today and every day after." Sarah stared at him, her mind racing. This wasn't the revelation she had been expecting. This was somehow more terrifying and more wonderful at the same time. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I know," Cole said gently. "And I'm not asking you to not be scared, I'm just asking you to be scared with me to take this chance together." He squeezed her hand softly. "But if you're not ready, if you need more time, I'll wait. I'll keep showing you who I am for as long as it takes." Sarah looked at their joined hands, at the way her smaller hand fit into his larger one. She thought about all the evidence she had gathered over these past months. The way he treated everyone with respect and kindness. The way he worked hard and saved his money. The way he had never once made her feel pressured or obligated. The way he had kept his word about letting his actions speak for him. "I'm scared," she repeated. "But I think I might be in love with you too, and that scares me most of all because it means I have something to lose again." Cole brought her hand to his lips and kissed it softly. "I can't promise you that life will be perfect or that nothing will ever go wrong. But I can promise you that I will never deliberately hurt you, never betray your trust, never make you regret taking this chance. Those are promises I make with full knowledge of what they mean." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears, healing tears. She turned toward him fully and lifted her free hand to his face, touching his jaw tentatively. He stayed still, letting her set the pace, letting her choose. She leaned in and kissed him, soft and sweet and full of hope. When they pulled apart, Cole was smiling that beautiful smile that transformed his whole face. "Does this mean you'll let me court you properly?" he asked. "With everyone knowing my intentions are marriage." "Yes," Sarah said, and the word felt like freedom. "Yes, you can court me." The town of Tombstone took notice when Cole and Sarah began walking out together as an official couple. Mrs. Patterson beamed with approval and started leaving little extras at Sarah's breakfast plate. Mrs. Hendricks gave Sarah time off when Cole planned something special. Even the old men who played checkers outside the general store nodded their approval when the couple passed by. But not everyone was pleased. There were women in town who had set their caps for Cole and resented that he had chosen the quiet seamstress from Philadelphia. There were men who muttered that Sarah was too standoffish, too proud, not warm enough for a good man like Cole Remington. Sarah heard the whispers but tried not to let them bother her. Cole heard them too and addressed them in his own way. When someone made a comment about Sarah being cold, he calmly explained that she was cautious, and that there was a difference. When someone suggested that she was only after his money, he laughed and pointed out that a stable hand didn't have enough money to be worth scheming over. By November, Cole began sharing his specific plans for the future. He had been saving money for 3 years and had almost enough to make an offer on a piece of land about 5 miles outside of town. It had a small house that needed work, a barn, and enough acreage to start a horse breeding operation. He wanted Sarah to see it before he made any commitments. They rode out on a borrowed wagon one Saturday afternoon. The land was beautiful in a stark, desert way, with distant mountains providing a dramatic backdrop. The house was indeed small and needed repairs, but it had good bones and potential. The barn was sound, and there was a well that provided clean water. "It's not much now," Cole said as they stood in the dusty yard. "But I can see what it could be. A dozen good horses in the pasture, the house fixed up proper with curtains in the windows and a garden out front, maybe a couple of dogs, children playing in the yard." He looked at her. "Can you see it?" Sarah closed her eyes and tried to picture it. For so long, she had been afraid to imagine a future that included happiness and permanence. But standing there with Cole beside her, she could see it. Not just the house and horses, but a life. A real life with someone she trusted, someone who had proven himself worthy of that trust. "I can see it," she said softly. "I can see us here." Cole pulled her into his arms, and Sarah leaned into his embrace, feeling safe and cherished. They stood there for a long moment, watching the sun begin its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Will you marry me, Sarah?" Cole asked. "I know it hasn't been long by conventional standards, but I know my own heart. I know what I want, and I want you. I want to build this life together, to make this place a home. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep with you every night. I want to be your partner, your protector, your friend, and your husband." Sarah pulled back to look at him, searching his face. What she saw there was sincerity, love, and patience. He would wait for her answer as long as she needed, would respect whatever she decided. But she had already made her decision, had been making it piece by piece with every action he had taken over these past months. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." They married in early December at the small church in Tombstone. It was a simple ceremony with Mrs. Patterson and several other townspeople in attendance. Sarah wore a dress she had made herself, cream-colored with delicate embroidery at the cuffs and collar. Cole wore a new suit that he had bought specially for the occasion. When he said his vows, his voice was steady and sure, and when Sarah said hers, she meant every word. The kiss they shared after being pronounced husband and wife was witnessed by their small gathering of friends, and the applause that followed was genuine and warm. As they walked back down the aisle together, Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in years. Absolute certainty that she had made the right choice. They spent their wedding night in the hotel, in the same building where Sarah had watched Cole defuse that situation with the drunk man months before. Cole was gentle and patient, letting Sarah set the pace, making sure she felt safe and loved. When she woke the next morning in his arms, she felt a peace that she had never expected to experience again. The months that followed were busy with building their life together. Cole finalized the purchase of the land, and they moved into the small house. Sarah continued working at the dress shop for a few more months while Cole worked on repairs and began acquiring his first breeding horses. They worked side by side in the evenings, painting walls and fixing shutters, turning the house into a home. By spring, they had 4 mares and a fine stallion that Cole had traded for with a rancher from California. Sarah had quit her job at the dress shop and set up a small sewing room in the house where she took on custom orders from town. The money wasn't as steady, but she enjoyed the flexibility and the ability to work from home. Their first real test as a couple came in June when a severe drought hit the territory. Water became scarce, and many ranchers and farmers struggled to keep their stock alive. Cole spent long hours hauling water from their well to the troughs, rationing carefully to make sure the horses had what they needed. Sarah helped however she could, taking on the household chores that Cole usually shared and bringing him food and water while he worked. There were moments of frustration and exhaustion, times when the weight of responsibility felt crushing. But they worked through it together, supporting each other without blame or resentment. When the rains finally came in late July, they stood in the downpour together, laughing and holding hands, grateful for the relief. By their first anniversary, the ranch was thriving. They had successfully bred 2 of the mares, and the foals were strong and healthy. Word was spreading about the quality of Remington horses, and Cole had received inquiries from buyers as far away as New Mexico. Sarah's sewing business was doing well too, with enough steady customers to provide a reliable income. But the greatest joy came one evening in January when Sarah sat Cole down at their kitchen table and told him she was pregnant. She watched his face carefully, gauging his reaction, still sometimes afraid that happiness this good couldn't be real. Cole's expression moved through surprise to wonder to absolute joy. He stood up and pulled her into his arms, holding her close but carefully, as if she were suddenly made of glass. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I'm sure," Sarah said, laughing at his sudden cautiousness. "And I'm healthy and strong, so you don't need to treat me like I might break." But Cole did treat her carefully, with a tenderness that made Sarah fall even more deeply in love with him. He took on more of the heavy work, insisted she rest when she was tired, and talked to her growing belly with such sweetness that it brought tears to her eyes. Their son was born in August 1884, a healthy baby with Cole's dark hair and Sarah's green eyes. They named him Thomas, after Sarah's maternal grandfather, who had been her grandmother's greatest supporter in all her unconventional endeavors. Holding her son in her arms, watching Cole's face as he looked at his child with awe and devotion, Sarah felt a completion she had never known was possible. The years that followed were full of the ordinary magic of building a life together. There were hard times, like when Cole broke his arm falling from a spooked horse and couldn't work for 6 weeks, or when little Thomas got so sick with fever that Sarah spent 3 days barely sleeping, watching over him until it broke. There were lean times when buyers were scarce and money was tight, when they ate simple meals and put off repairs, but there were far more good times. Thomas's first steps, taken toward his father who was crouched with arms outstretched and joy on his face. The spring when they bred 6 mares and all 6 foals were born healthy. The day Sarah finished a particularly elaborate dress for the governor's wife and received double the payment she had expected. Christmas mornings and birthday celebrations and quiet evenings on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains while Thomas played at their feet. Sarah's second pregnancy came when Thomas was 3. This time it was a daughter, born in April 1888 with Cole's smile and a head full of auburn hair like her mother. They named her Elizabeth, after Sarah's grandmother, and she was fierce and stubborn from the moment she drew her first breath. Cole was an extraordinary father, patient and playful with Thomas, gentle and doting with Elizabeth. Sarah watched him teach Thomas to ride, saw how carefully he explained things, how he praised effort even when results weren't perfect. She saw how he held Elizabeth and sang to her in the evenings, how he made silly faces to get her to laugh. By 1890, the Remington Ranch was well established and prosperous. They had expanded the house, adding 2 more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. The barn had been rebuilt bigger and better. They had 12 horses in various stages of training, and Cole had hired a young man named Daniel to help with the work. Sarah's sewing room had become popular enough that she could pick and choose her clients, focusing on the elaborate projects she enjoyed most. Thomas was 6 now, already showing his father's way with animals, spending hours in the barn talking to the horses and learning everything Cole could teach him. Elizabeth at 2 was a whirlwind of energy and curiosity, constantly getting into things she shouldn't and charming everyone with her gap-toothed grin. One evening after the children were in bed, Sarah and Cole sat on their porch as they had hundreds of times before. The air was cool and clear, full of stars. Cole had his arm around Sarah's shoulders and she was leaned into his warmth, completely comfortable and content. "You ever think about those early days?" Cole asked. "When you were so scared to trust me?" Sarah smiled. "Sometimes. It seems like another lifetime now. I was so determined to protect myself, so sure that all men were the same." "I don't blame you for that," Cole said. "You had every reason to be cautious. But you were patient," Sarah said. "You understood that trust had to be earned and you were willing to do the work of earning it. You showed me through your actions every single day that you were different, that you were safe, that you were worthy of my trust and my love." Cole kissed the top of her head. "Best thing I ever did was convince you to take a chance on me. Best thing I ever did was let myself believe that not all men are like the ones who hurt me," Sarah replied. "That there are good men in this world and I deserve to find one." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the desert. Inside the house, Sarah could hear Thomas talking in his sleep and Elizabeth's soft breathing from the room they had prepared for her. This was her life now, so different from the one she had imagined as a girl in Philadelphia, or even as a woman running from disappointment 3 years later. "I love you," Sarah said softly. "I don't say it enough, but I do. I love you more than I ever thought I could love anyone." "I love you too," Cole replied. "Every single day, Sarah. Every single day I wake up grateful that you walked into that stable, that you gave me a chance to prove myself. You're the best thing that ever happened to me." Sarah turned to kiss him, and in that kiss was everything they had built together, all the trust and love and partnership that had grown from the seeds of patience and consistent action. When they pulled apart, both of them were smiling. The years continued to pass, bringing new challenges and new joys. Thomas grew into a fine young man who inherited his father's skill with horses and his mother's thoughtful nature. Elizabeth became as accomplished with a needle as her mother, though she preferred riding to sewing, and could often be found racing across the desert on her favorite mare. They had one more child, another son they named William, born when Sarah was 36 and bringing unexpected joy to their already full household. The ranch prospered beyond Cole's early dreams. Remington horses became known throughout Arizona and beyond for their quality, temperament, and training. Sarah's reputation as a seamstress grew as well, and she eventually trained 2 apprentices from town, passing on her skills to a new generation. But more than any material success, what Cole and Sarah built together was a relationship based on mutual respect, trust, and love that deepened with each passing year. The foundation Cole had laid with his patient actions in those early months proved solid enough to weather every storm. Sarah never again felt the fear that had gripped her when she first arrived in Tombstone, running from disappointment and convinced she could never trust again. Instead, she had learned that trust was possible, that love was real, and that some men truly were different. Cole had shown her through his actions, day after day, year after year, that he was a man of his word, that his love was not conditional or temporary, that his commitment was absolute. On their 20th anniversary, they stood in the same spot where Cole had first proposed, looking out over land they had transformed together through hard work and dedication. Their children were grown now, Thomas running the horse breeding operation with Cole, Elizabeth married to a good man who reminded Sarah very much of her own husband, William studying to be a veterinarian in Tucson. 20 years, Sarah said wonderingly. It's gone so fast. Best 20 years of my life, Cole replied. He looked at her with eyes that held the same love they had shown on their wedding day, perhaps even deeper now with all the years of partnership behind them. I'd do it all again exactly the same way. Even the part where I was too scared to trust you, Sarah asked with a smile. Even that, Cole confirmed. Because it taught me patience. It taught me that the best things in life are worth working for, worth proving yourself for. And it taught you that you were strong enough to take a chance again. Sarah leaned into him, feeling his arms come around her in the embrace that had become her sanctuary, her home. You told me to watch your actions. That was the smartest thing anyone ever said to me. And you were brave enough to actually watch, Cole said. To give me the chance to show you who I really was. That took more courage than I think you give yourself credit for. They stood there as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant colors, just as they had so many times before. But this time there was a weight of history to the moment, a recognition of all they had built and survived and accomplished together. Sarah thought about the frightened woman who had hidden in a stable, convinced she could never trust a man again. She thought about Cole's patient persistence, his steady actions that had slowly dismantled her walls. She thought about the life they had created together, the children they had raised, the love that had grown stronger with each passing year. I would do it all again, too, she said finally. Every hard moment, every scary choice, every time I had to push past my fear. Because it all led me here, to this life with you. Cole kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of 20 years of devotion. When they pulled apart, both of them were smiling, their faces weathered by time and sun but their eyes bright with happiness. They walked back to the house hand in hand, passing the barn where the horses nickered softly and the well where Cole had hauled so much water during that long-ago drought. They passed the garden Sarah had planted, now mature and lush. They passed the places where their children had played and learned and grown. Inside, the house was warm and welcoming, filled with the evidence of their life together. Photographs on the walls showed their family at various ages. Furniture they had bought or built together filled the rooms. Sarah's sewing basket sat in the corner of the parlor, and Cole's favorite chair was positioned to catch the afternoon light. That night, lying in bed with Cole's arms around her, Sarah felt a contentment so deep it brought tears to her eyes. She had been hurt before by trusting men, had learned the hard way that words could be lies and promises could be broken. But Cole had shown her a different truth. He had shown her that some men meant what they said, that some promises were kept, that love could be real and lasting if it was built on the right foundation. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what?" Cole's voice was sleepy but attentive. "For being patient. For showing me through your actions that you were different. For loving me enough to let me heal at my own pace. For giving me this life, this family, this happiness I never thought I'd have." Cole's arms tightened around her. "Thank you for taking the chance, for being brave enough to trust again. For building this life with me. I love you, Sarah, today and always." "Today and always," Sarah echoed, and she fell asleep feeling safe and loved and profoundly grateful for the day a cowboy had told her to watch his actions, and then had spent the rest of his life proving that his actions matched his words. The years that followed their 20th anniversary brought the natural progression of life. They became grandparents, marveling at Elizabeth's children and eventually Thomas's as well. The ranch continued to thrive under Thomas's capable management, with Cole transitioning into more of an advisory role as his body reminded him that he wasn't a young man anymore. Sarah still sewed but focused on teaching others and creating special pieces for her grandchildren. William came home from Tucson with his veterinary degree and set up a practice in Tombstone, close enough to visit regularly. He brought with him a quiet, intelligent woman named Margaret who became like a daughter to Sarah and Cole. When William and Margaret married in 1895, it was at the ranch, with 3 generations of the Remington family celebrating together. Cole and Sarah grew old together with the same grace they had brought to building their life. There were aches and pains, the inevitable slowing down that came with age, but there was also a deep satisfaction in looking at everything they had created. Their children were happy and successful. Their grandchildren were healthy and loved. The ranch stood as a testament to hard work and dedication. On a warm evening in May 1902, Cole and Sarah sat on their porch as they had countless times before. They were in their 60s now, their hair gray, their faces lined with age and experience. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the young man who had offered patience and the young woman who had been brave enough to accept it. "Did I ever tell you that you're the bravest person I know?" Cole asked suddenly. Sarah laughed, surprised. "Me, I'm not brave. I was terrified of everything when we met." "That's exactly why you're brave," Cole insisted. "Bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's being afraid and doing the thing anyway. You were so scared, had every reason to never trust again, and you chose to try. That takes real courage." Sarah considered this, thinking about the woman she had been and the woman she had become. "Maybe, but you made it easier. You never pushed, never demanded. You just showed me day after day that I was safe with you." "We were good for each other," Cole said simply. "Still are." "Still are," Sarah agreed. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. In the distance, they could hear Thomas calling to one of the horses and the sound of grandchildren playing. The evening was perfect, peaceful, full of the life they had built together. Sarah reached over and took Cole's hand, interlacing her fingers with his. After all these years, the gesture was as natural as breathing. His hand was weathered and marked with age, but it was still the hand that had offered her water in a stable, that had held hers on countless walks, that had supported her through joy and sorrow, that had built a life alongside hers. "I love you," she said, the words as true now as they had been on their wedding day, perhaps even more so for all the years of proof behind them. "I love you too," Cole replied. "Thank you for watching my actions. Thank you for giving me the chance to show you who I was. Thank you for this life." "Thank you for being worth the risk," Sarah said softly. They sat there until the stars came out, hand in hand, surrounded by everything they had created together. And if someone had asked Sarah in that moment whether she regretted taking the chance on the cowboy who had told her to watch his actions, she would have laughed at the very idea. Because everything good in her life, every moment of happiness, every precious memory, had come from the day she decided to be brave enough to trust again. The trust she had lost had been rebuilt, stronger and deeper than before, because it was based not on pretty words or empty promises, but on consistent, patient, loving actions that had proven themselves true over and over again across the years. Cole had kept his word in every way that mattered, and Sarah had found the courage to believe in love again. That was their story, the story of two people who found each other at the right time, who built something real and lasting through patience and trust and love. It was a story that would continue through their children and grandchildren, a legacy of what was possible when actions spoke louder than words, when love was proven through deeds rather than just declared with speeches. And on that May evening, sitting on the porch of the home they had built together, Cole and Sarah Remington knew that they had succeeded in creating something beautiful. Not because life had been perfect or easy, but because they had faced it together, supporting each other, trusting each other, loving each other through every challenge and celebration. The cowboy had told the scared woman to watch his actions, and he had spent the rest of his life showing her that he was a man worth trusting. And the woman who had been hurt before had found the courage to try again, to believe again, to love again. Together, they had created a life that was proof that some stories really do have happy endings, that some men really are different, that love really can last when it's built on the right foundation. And that foundation, solid and unshakable, was the consistent actions of a good man who understood that trust had to be earned, and who had dedicated his life to earning it every single day.